Dr. Sara, the Phoenix of Education, a biography by VMS. Dr. Sara's life was a journey carved not in comfort but in the fire of struggle, betrayal, and resilience. Born with a mind sharpened for knowledge and a heart dedicated to shaping futures, she chose the path of education, an arena that demanded patience, sacrifice, and service. From her earliest days, she proved herself an exceptional teacher. Her students adored her for the way she could bring dull lessons to life, turning every subject into a living experience. She worked in schools and colleges, often for meager pay, but never compromised on her standards. She poured her energy into her work, often sacrificing her personal comforts to see her students thrive. In return, she earned respect, love, and a reputation for excellence. But success has its price. In every institution she entered, she became the glowing flame that attracted both admiration and envy. Seniors and colleagues, threatened by her brilliance, tried to dim her light. Double standards ruled the corridors where mediocrity was praised and integrity punished. Rumors were whispered behind her back, conspiracies were woven to tarnish her name, and professional jealousies turned into personal vendettas. Yet Dr. Sara was no ordinary woman. The managements and founders of the institutions could see what her peers tried to hide. She was a one woman army capable of single handedly carrying the weight of academic standards. Vulnerable only in her humanity, she was both the strongest asset and the easiest target. Her brilliance made her indispensable, but her sincerity made her susceptible. Many, seeing her strength wrapped in grace, tried to trap her by hook or crook, pretending mentorship, offering false promises, or extending hands of friendship with ulterior motives. Dr. Sara, however, was not one to surrender. She guarded her dignity and integrity like armor, running from pillar to post when needed, yet never bowing down to the injustices surrounding her. The same fire that burned her also forged her spirit into steel. At last, weary of pettiness of institutions that could not value her worth, she chose independence with trembling hands but a determined heart. She laid the foundation of her own educational academy. It was not an easy birth. Financial struggles, bureaucratic hurdles, and societal judgments stood in her way, but Dr. Sara had already survived storms fiercer than these. Her academy soon bloomed not just as a place of learning but as a sanctuary where education meant more than rot and ranks. Students thrived under her vision, and parents trusted her with their children's future. And what had once been denied to her, freedom, respect, and recognition, was now hers in abundance. She was no longer just an employee battling shadows in hallways. She was the ruler of her own roost. Dr. Sara's story is not merely about a woman who thought, it is about a woman who refused to be broken. She stood tall in a world that tried to belittle her, rebuild herself every time she was torn down, and finally rose as a phoenix of education. Her biography is a testament to resilience, proof that dignity and integrity, when guarded fiercely, can lead not just to survival but to triumph. Chapter 1, we could discuss it in different chapters. Now I want to explain the chapter 1, the roots of resilience. Sara was born into a modest home where values weighed more than possessions. Her father was a man of discipline, believing that honesty was worth more than any wealth. Her mother, gentle yet firm, taught her that dignity was not something to be begged for, it was something to be lived every single day. Between these two pillars, Sara's childhood was quietly shaped. Books became her closest companions, while other children spent their evenings at play. Sara could be found curled in a corner with a notebook, scribbling lines of thought or rehearsing imaginary lessons before a row of pillows. She could call her students even at the tender age. She seemed to carry the spark of a teacher in her eyes. Life at home was not without its struggle. Money was scarce, and every expense had to be carefully measured. And there were days when sacrifices were made silently, her parents cutting down their own comfort so that Sarah could continue in school without interruption. Sarah noticed it all. Instead of feeling weighed down, she let those sacrifices become her fuel. She promised herself that one day she would make their hardships worthwhile. Schooling itself wasn't always easy. She was a bright student, yes, but often faced ridicule for being too serious, too ambitious. Friends teased her for spending more time with books than with games. When she carried herself with quiet confidence, if she ever felt the sting of isolation, she bore it silently, never letting it dim her hunger for learning. Her teachers too began to notice. They saw in her a clarity and commitment that stood out even among the best. Some encouraged her, nurturing her gift. Others, out of insecurity, tried to suppress her shine. But Sarah learned early that the world would not always clap for one's success, and sometimes the world would look away or worse, whispers against it. It was during these years that Sarah developed her first lesson in resilience, to stand tall even when no one stood beside her. By the time she reached her teen years, she was already dreaming of chalkboards and classrooms and lectures, and she wanted not just to earn a living but to touch lives. Teaching to her was not a job, it was a calling, a way to plant seeds in young minds that could grow into forests of possibility. Her parents were proud, though concerned. Teaching was noble, yes, but it was not always rewarding, at least not in money. Still, they let her choose a path because she knew this was not just a profession for Sarah, it was her destiny. Looking back, Sarah would one day realize how much of her strength was shaped in those years. The silence of sacrifice, the sting of envy, the joy of rediscovery, and comfort of books. And these were the roots of resilience that would carry her through storms far greater than she could then imagine. For now, she was just a young girl with a dream to teach, to inspire, and to stand for something bigger than herself. And thus began the journey of the woman who would one day rise from the ashes of betrayal to rule the roost of education, Dr. Sara. Chapter 2, The Teacher Awakens. The dream of standing before a classroom finally came true when Sarah entered her first teaching job. The school was small, tucked away in a bustling town when resources were scarce, but the thirst for learning among children was boundless. Her salary was barely enough to meet her travel and personal expenses. Many of her peers scoffed at her choice, reminding her that teaching doesn't fill her pockets. But for Sarah, it was never about money. The moment she stepped into the classroom, chalk in hand, and saw thirsty, eager faces waiting for her words, she felt a sense of belonging she had never felt anywhere else. And her methods were different, where others stuck to rigid textbooks or I used creativity. She wove stories into her lessons, turned complex subjects into simple examples drawn from everyday life, and treated her students not as subordinates but as partners, friends. And in discovery, within week, the children who once sat silent and disinterested were now leaning forward, eyes bright, hungry for more. The school management began to notice, parents began to whisper about the new teacher who made their children talk excitedly at home about math, science, and language. For the first time, Sarah realized that her gift was not just teaching, it was igniting passion. But the staff room was not as welcoming as the classroom. Some of her seniors, seasoned but uninspired, viewed her fresh energy with suspicion. She is showing off, a few muttered. She is trying to outshine us, others whispered. Sarah was too young to understand the full weight of professional jealousy, but she could sense the chill in the air. Invitations to staff gatherings would skip her, conversations would quiet down when she entered, and the mistakes, however small, were magnified. Still, she did not falter. For every bitter glance, she had 100 warm smiles from her students. For every whispered criticism, she had a parent's grateful word, and that was enough to keep her going. Years passed, and she moved from one institution to another, colleges, schools, training training centers. Each time the story repeated itself, small pay, big responsibilities, endless expectations, yet each time she excelled, leaving behind a mark of excellence wherever she went. Her classes were known for discipline wrapped in warmth. She had the rare ability to demand respect without raising her voice. Students adored her, colleagues respected her outwardly, though some secretly resented her growing reputation. Managements, however, loved her. She was their one woman army, the dependable staff member who could be trusted with any responsibility, academic or administrative. But with recognition came new dangers. Her vulnerability as a sincere, hardworking woman in a competitive world became visible. People began to approach her not just as a colleague but with hidden motives, mentors who offered guidance but expected personal closeness in return, peers who praised her in public but schemed in private. Sarah, however, stood firm. Her dignity was a shield. She worked tirelessly, often sacrificing her health and rest, but never once did she let go of her principles. In the midst of long hours, low wages, endless struggles, one thing remained constant: her unwavering passion for teaching. Every day she stepped into the classroom, the world outside, its whispers, politics, and betrayal ceased to matter. In front of a student, she was whole, alive, and unshakable. It was in those years that the seeds of a future academy were unknowingly sown, for even then, Sarah carried a quiet thought: what if there was a place where education was pure, a place free from politics, free from prejudice, a place built only on learning and respect? That dream lay buried for now, but one day it would rise. Chapter 3: Shadows in the Staff Room. The classroom was always Sarah's safe haven, but the staff room told another story. Her laughter carried double meanings. Conversations ended abruptly when she walked in, and every success of hers was twisted into suspicion. Her rise has been shifted. Students adored her, parents trusted her, management leaned heavily on her for everything from lesson planning to event organization. She became the face of the institution, reliable soldier who never said no. But in the silent world of faculty politics, her excellence was not celebrated, it was envied. Whispers began: she was trying to impress the management, she is trying to impress the management. She acts like she is the only teacher here, too ambitious for her own good. At first, Sarah ignored them. She believed the truth always prevailed, that hard work would speak louder than rumors, but the whispers grew louder, trickling into the ears of the very people she worked for. There were colleagues who lived by double standards, kind to her in the open, venomous behind her back. They praised her in meetings, but in private circles accused her of being manipulative, of chasing fame. Some even spread cruel insinuations about her personal life, questioning her integrity simply because she was unmarried and independent. For Sarah, the betrayal cut deep. She had always believed in sincerity and loyalty, but here she saw the ugly face of professional jealousy. Nights were sleepless, mornings were heavy. The burden of walking into a room full of hidden enemies weighed on her spirit, and yet she never broke. When the management tested her with impossible deadlines, she delivered. When students were in distress, she stood by them like a rock. When cultural events needed leadership, she organized them flawlessly. Her energy seemed endless, her smile unbroken, even if inside she was fighting silent battles every day. The management, the founders began to see the pattern. They realized that while others complained, Sarah performed. While others looked for excuses, Sarah looked for solutions. She was, in their eyes, indispensable, a one woman army. But being indispensable had its own price. It made her more visible, more vulnerable. Those who could not match her sincerity sought to bring her down with schemes. Some seniors began to set traps, deliberately withholding information from her, assigning her impossible tasks and waiting for her to fail. Others tried to win her over with false affection, sweet words in the corridor, gestures of friendship, only to later manipulate her trust. Sarah learned a walk a fine line. She guarded her dignity fiercely, refusing to be drawn into petty games. Yet every day felt like a balancing act between survival and betrayal. It was during these trying years that she discovered the true weight of resilience. Her battles were no longer just about teaching, they were about protecting her integrity in a world eager to snatch it away. Behind every applause in the classroom, she carried invisible scars from the staff room, and though no one could see, Sarah was slowly learning that to truly thrive, she would one day have to step beyond these walls altogether. And for now, however, she endured quietly, gracefully, and with the courage of a warrior standing alone in a battlefield of whispers. Chapter 4: Dignity Under Siege. And Sarah had always believed that a woman's greatest strength was not her character, her greatest treasure was her dignity, and her greatest strength was her character and her dignity. But life in its hardest form seemed determined to test her long she could protect both. Her growing reputation as a capable teacher, organizer, and a problem solver made her the center of attention not only for students and the management but also for people whose intentions were far from noble. Some colleagues, unable to compete with her brilliance, turned to sly advances. They spoke to her under the guise of mentorship, offering guidance and support, but their eyes carried something unspoken. Others used the mask of friendship, praising her work and drawing close only to later hint a personal favor. Some were even bolder, dropping in and juice, cornering her in quiet spaces and making her feel unsafe in what should have been her second home. Each incident was a battle. She could have shouted, she could have walked away, but she chose a different path. She learned to stand tall, to say no firmly, to turn away from flattery, to call out behaviors without fear. Her silence was no longer meekness, it was a weapon. No means no. And when she did speak, her words carried the weight of unshakable conviction. But the price of saying no was heavy. Rumors followed her wherever she went. Some said she was too proud, others claimed she was arrogant, difficult to work with. At times, the malicious whispers reached even the management. Yet, strangely, the very founders who employed her continued to trust her. They had seen her work ethic, her honesty, and her results. To them, she was still their one woman army, capable, loyal, and indispensable. Still, the loneliness weighed on her. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of waiting wolves. There were moments when she sat alone in her house, a small balcony, and head in her hands, wondering how long she could carry on. Was the struggle worth it? Was her dignity safe in such a world? And then she would remember her students, the eager eyes waiting for her lessons, the children who ran to her with notebooks, the graduates who thanked her years later for shaping their lives, and they became her anchor, her reason to endure. It was in these years that Sarah hardened into steel. She learned to sense deception before it unfolded, to cut ties with manipulators, to surround herself only with truth. She became fiercely protective of her integrity, knowing that once lost, it could never be regained. A deep down, a quiet truth was forming within her heart. She knew that she could not remain forever in institutions that demanded excellence, allowed her exploitations. She realized she could no longer safeguard her dignity in places where politics, favorism, and hidden agendas and vendettas thrived. The thought grew steadily. One day I must create my own space, a place where I answer no one's games, where education is pure, and where no one can touch my integrity. And she was telling to herself, one day I must create my own space, a place where I answer to no one's games, where education is pure, and where no one can touch my integrity. That dream had not yet taken shape, but it lived in her like an ember glowing quietly and waiting for the day it would burst into flame. For now, Sarah stood alone, fighting her daily battle. She was scared yet but unbroken, and every attack on her dignity only made her more destined to protect it until her last breath. And chapter 5, the turning point. By now, Sarah had weathered countless storms, and she had seen jealousy, betrayal, unwanted advances, and endless rumors, and yet she never let her work slip. To the outside world, she was the perfect teacher, the unstoppable one woman army, but inside, a restless had begun to grow. Her daily routine, early morning, long hours at school or college, endless piles of corrections, late nights preparing lessons were draining her body and spirit. What made it worse was knowing that no matter how much she gave, the system around her never changed. Management's louder results, yes, but they never shielded her fully from the politics. Colleagues smiled at her. The knives were they sharpened behind her back. She began to ask herself hard questions. How long can I fight alone? Am I meant to be just another employee carrying others' burdens while protecting myself from their traps? Is there not a greater purpose waiting for me? The answer came slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. She realized her gift was too powerful to remain caged. She had been building others' dreams, holding up institutions that did not deserve her loyalty. If she could survive and excel in such hostile environments, what could she achieve if she created her own? This is what I must build. This is what I was born for, she was thinking to herself. And chapter 6, the birth of an academy, the decision was made, and the path ahead was nothing such short of a mountain. Sarah had no rich inheritance to fall back, no political influence, no network or powerful friends. All she had was her savings, knowledge, her unshakable belief that education could be pure if built on integrity. The first challenge was money, renting for a building, furniture, books, blackboards, and projectors and classroom arrangement. Even the small supplies added up to more than she had to move. This would have been a full stop. So Sarah, it was only a comma. She sold whatever like gold she owned, dipped into her meager savings, and borrowed from handful of people who believed in her. Every rupee was stretched like an elastic band, and she made it work. The second challenge was trust. Parents used to sending their children to long established schools were hesitant about a new academy started by a single woman. And what if it was closes in a year? It closes in a year, they asked. And what if she cannot handle it? Because she is too young. Sarah had to go from house to house, speaking personally with families, assuring them not with promises but with a passion in her eyes. When the academy finally opened, it was modest, just a handful of classrooms, bare walls, and second-hand desks polished to look new. But when Sarah looked into the front of her first batch of students, chalk in hand, she was standing at the gates of kingdom that she had built on her own blood. Her teachings was as magnetic as ever, but now it was infused with something great of freedom. She no longer had to bow to politics, double standards, or manipulations. Every decision was hers, every value reflected her soul. The academy slowly grew, not through flashy advertisements but through word of mouth. Students went home, inspired, parents spoke to neighbors, and soon the classroom began to fill. Sarah poured her heart into every detail, designing the curriculum, training young teachers, mentoring struggling students, and even sweeping the floors herself when needed. Of course, the challenges never ended. There were months when fees came late, electricity bills piled up, when creditors knocked at her door, and there were critics waiting to see her fail, colleagues from her past whispering that she was chasing an impassable dream. But Sarah had crossed the line of no return, and she was not going back. In time, the academy blossomed. The very parents who once hesitated now boasted of being part of an institution. Students began to win competitions, score high ranks, and more importantly, develop a love for learning. Sarah's academy became more than just a school. It became a sanctuary of respect, discipline, and inspiration. For the first time in her life, Sarah tasted true authority, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that comes from living one's truth. She was no longer the lone fighter in someone's battlefield. She was the commander of her own. Standing one evening in the quiet courtyard of her academy, watching the sun set behind the small building she had built brick by brick, Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She whispered softly, "This is mine. This is the life I chose. This is the freedom I fought for." The phoenix had risen, not just to survive, but to rule. Chapter 7, Raising from the Storm. The early days of our academy filled with struggle, uncertainty, endless work, but slowly transformation began to take place not just in classroom but in Sarah herself. Her students thrived under her guidance. Children who once struggled with basic concepts now solved problems with confidence. Teenagers had also hope in learning from found curiosity and joy again. Parents who had once doubted the small fledgling academy became its strongest advocates, and word spread quickly. This was a place where education education was not just about grades but about shaping character, creativity, integrity, and courage. Sarah's dedication became legendary, and she was often seen late into the night reviewing lesson plans, mentoring teachers, and even helping students one by one. It was one-on-one class for the desperate and children who need more of a personal attention. Her presence was both inspiring and reassuring, a constant reminder that excellence was not accidental but the result of hard work and integrity. Challenges persisted, of course. Competitors tried to lure away her students, bureaucrats tested her patience with endless regulations, and skeptics whispered doubts about her future. But Sarah had learned long ago that storms were temporary and resilience was permanent. Every obstacle became a lesson, every challenge an opportunity to strengthen her academy and her leadership. In time, recognition came naturally. Educational boards sought her advice. Parents from distant neighborhoods sent their children confidently. Former colleagues began to look upon her with a mixture of awe and regret. She had become more than a teacher. She was a symbol of what dedication, vision, and integrity could achieve. Yet, despite all the external success, Sarah remained humble. She never forgot the long years of struggle, the whispers behind her back, and the moments of fear and doubt. Instead, she used them as a fuel to build a culture of respect, empowerment, and fairness in her academy. Every teacher was treated as a valued partner. Every student was as precious mind to nurture. Her story began to inspire not just her students but also countless women who saw in her the proof that perseverance and dignity could conquer when the hardest professional battles. She had taken the world's doubts, insults, and betrayals and turned them into bricks for a foundation of greatness. Standing in the courtyard of a thriving academy one afternoon, she was watching as students laughing and run between classes. Sarah felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. She had risen above the storms of envy, politics, and exploitation. She had taken control of her life, her destiny, and her dreams. No longer the lone fighter navigating hostile corridors. Sarah was now a leader, a mentor, an architect of future. She had now just survived, and she had not just survived, she had triumphed. And the journey was more than personal success. It was a beacon, a story that whispered to every struggling woman, every teacher facing injustice, every student seeking inspiration. You can rise, you can endure, you can thrive. Sarah had done it. She had turned trials to triumphs and whispers to eclats and ambition into a legacy. Chapter 8: The Legacy of a Phoenix. Dr. Sara's journey was never easy, and it never promised comfort, but her earliest days as a young girl with love for learning and her years battling jealousy, betrayal, and endless professional obstacles, she had known struggle intimately. Yet even every challenge had shaped her, every setback strengthened her, every injustice forged a resilience few could match. Her academy, now thriving, respected more than a business, it was the embodiment of her values. Her education was not measured merely in grades or ranking, but in curiosity, integrity, and confidence. Teachers found mentorship, students found inspiration, parents found a place where their children could grow in safety and excellence. But Sarah's true legacy was not just in the walls of her academy, it was in the hearts she had touched, the lives that she had shaped, and the example she had set. She had shown that success does not require compromise, that dignity is worth fighting for, and a single determined person can rise above corruption, envy, and betrayal to create something extraordinary. Women looked at her and saw courage. Teachers saw what dedication and vision could achieve. Students saw the power of perseverance. She became a living proof that no system, no politics, no opposition could extinguish a spirit committed to integrity and excellence. And yet, Sarah remained humble. She often reflected on her journey, remembering lonely nights and whispered conspiracies and silent battles she had fought. She understood that the phoenix of education she had become was built on ashes of struggles, but those very ashes had been her foundation. She also realized that a story was bigger than her, and it was a story for every woman, every teacher, every student who had been underestimated, undetermined, or mistreated. It was a story that said, rise, stand tall, protect your dignity, and one day you will rule the roost of your own destiny. I repeat, rise, Stand tall, protect your dignity, and one day you will rule the roost of your own destiny. Dr. Sara, once a solitary teacher in hostile corridors, had transformed into a leader, a mentor, and an inspiration. She had taken the challenges of a lifetime and turned them into a beacon for others. The academy she built would continue to educate, empower, and uplift long after her own days. But the true legacy was the example she had set, that resilience, courage, and integrity could turn the harshest trials into triumphs. And so the phoenix of education rose not just once but again and again in every life she touched, in every student she inspired, in every woman who saw in her the possibility of her own rise. Sarah's journey was a testament to the enduring truth that greatness is not measured by comfort or ease, but by the courage to stand alone, fight for one's principles, and rise above every storm. If you want, be like Sarah the Great.